Thanks. Austin Diepenhorst and Robbie Crow. Austin, you're coming in to us from San Diego, and Robbie, you're in the Glasgow area.
Yes.
Um, Thanks a lot for getting together to talk about some of the issues around the seeing impaired and people like yourselves in piping and drumming. And the idea is just to get a little more kind of understanding of enlightenment about your experiences so that we might learn more from them. So thanks a lot for that. Um, so maybe tell us a little bit, how did you first get attracted to take up piping and drumming? And what were your first lessons like? Maybe start with you, Austin.
Well, I I think what really attracted me was first of all the sound. I think I saw them on television and was just kind of curious about it. It was kind of a passing interest, and then I began to read more into it and look up online and see what was involved with it.
Hmm.
And I expressed an interest to somebody who I worked with at an elementary school here in San Diego, and she knew somebody who had played in a local pipe band as a drummer, and she was the braille transcriber at the school. She's really involved in making materials in classes accessible to me and other students. Um, and so I mentioned to her that I was thinking about trying to learn how to play, and she's like, "Oh, I in Highlander pipe band." And so she actually took me to my first lesson, and I mean I've been playing ever since.
Okay. And Robbie, what about you with snare drumming?
Yeah, so obviously, for me, pipe bands were more of a normality, you'd say, growing up in Falkirk area. Within about 10 miles, you have Denny and Dunnypace, Boghall and Bathgate, Shotts and Dykehead, all of these really sort of top pipe bands. So growing up around that area was really, you were exposed to pipe bands on a semi-regular basis, especially during the winter months. Sorry, during the summer months. I also came from Airth, which you'll know yourself is quite, Airth Highland Games is quite a prominent solo piping competition. So I heard them from a very young age, and like Austin, I was very interested in the sound. So I think, especially for people who are visually impaired, if you've got a strong sound, or you can really get a strong feeling from sound as you do with pipe bands, you're just going to be naturally drawn to it because it's something that you can connect with. Um, so yeah, so just from a young age, I always enjoyed watching the Edinburgh Tattoo, the local Highland Games. When I first started, my one aim was just to play at Earth Highland Games with the local pipe band. At that time, were Ala Bomar, who are a non-competing pipe band.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I just got into it because I'm from an area that is so rich in pipe band history, and it's just something that I wanted to do from the start. I should point out that I did try other instruments, and drumming wasn't my first. Side drumming wasn't my first choice. I wanted to play bagpipes, but my mother put a very quick stop to that, saying you're not bringing that noise into my house. After this was after I tried to play saxophone, tried to play guitar. I think I basically went for all the loudest instruments possible, and basically settled on the drums. So yeah, so that's how it just happened because of the area that I lived in.
Hmm. And Robbie, what about your first lessons? What were those like?
So I learned with a non-competing pipe band to begin with. Again, a la Bomar. And when I walked into my very first lesson, I was quite lucky in that the drum instructor who I was with, well, actually, first of all, we walked into the piping room, and they were all very keen to see a new learner coming along, and then as soon as they found out I wanted to play drums, they basically shoved me out as quick as they could. But so I walked into the drumming room, and the drumming instructor at that time had a background in working with young people who had additional needs, and we didn't know that. We didn't go there for that reason. It just turned out that that was what happened. So Seth at the time basically asked us one question, and that was, does he have spatial perception? Because that's the most important thing. As long as you know where the drum is, then you know, drum there, hit drum. As long as you can do that, then the rest of it builds from there. So that's how it really started. Seth sort of taught me how to hold the sticks in my hand, left hand, right hand, traditional grip, match grip. And then we went on from there. But it was very much the sort of monkey see, monkey do way of teaching, or in my case, monkey hear, monkey play. It wasn't about reading music. It wasn't about getting an understanding of how his music is written, how his music phrased when it's on paper. It was very much play and repeat. So it was very much learning by ear. I don't think I learned to. I started pipe bands 2007. I don't think I actually learned to read until around 2014. So it was very much audible based to begin with, and for the first part of my time in pipe bands.
Maybe we'll return to the reading aspect of it in just a bit, but do want to hear from Austin, about your first lessons and how important was that first teacher for you in piping?
So much like Robbie, I grew up wanting to play, tried out many different instruments. I was lucky that I had a family that was supportive of that. I think my first instrument was the trumpet, and I think most of my instruments were wind instruments, so I guess that was kind of built in from the get-go. But I dabbled around with the piano, and I still do at this point. I've played a variety. I've played the saxophone to the double bass and in the orchestra when I was in high school. So when I decided to learn, pretty much it was the same situation. Although with pipes, that was the first instrument that I'd gotten any real formal instruction in. And the first lessons, very good. They were rather inconsistent. As I went. So when I started, I was consistently going to local high school where Cameron Highlanders had free lessons hosted on Wednesday evenings. And one of the instructors there was named Kathy Mars. And she was the first to show me how to hold the chanter properly, the fingers straight, and the first bottom hand notes and scales, etc. And a lot of that was fairly inconsistent because I would not be able to come all the time. So a lot of what I had to rely on was recordings and videos online, and other. I read a lot into this because it's not as normal of a thing over here. So I spent a lot of time on the internet researching how the instrument was supposed to work and how certain embellishments were performed in person. But at that time, lessons were very inconsistent. I think until about a year into my learning, which was when I began lessons with a man named Richard King, who was extreme in my playing and in my growth as a player and as a person, because he caught me right at that time where I was 13, 14, 15, and he got me all the way up from grade 3 to grade 1. He was the one sheepskin bag, and so that's pretty much how things started with me. And it was never really a chore. So I just took time. Also, I was beginning to play with the Cameron's band in grade 5 and grade 4. So it kind of became more of a thing about a year into it. I was always drawn to it.
Great. Maybe talk a little bit about Robbie. You just mentioned writing out, being able to read music. Robbie, were you using a form of Braille or a Braille transposition of the music, drum scores?
No. So my eyesight, although I can read Braille, and I was taught to read Braille from an early age, my level of eyesight means that if I go close to a computer, then I can read print if it's big. So In terms of reading, I actually ended up just teaching myself how to read and write music. I was never given any formal lessons on reading and writing. I would just download the drum score from, at that time it was drumming.tk, which I think is now Scott Niven's site. I'm not sure if it's still up, but that was a library of drumming sheet music. So I would just download the sheet music. I would then play a recording of the score that I could find, and that's how I taught myself to read and write music, just by using mainstream tools. And obviously it takes a bit of a mathematical brain to work out note values and stuff like that. But I mean, it certainly worked, because it is a sort of running joke in the band just now. I play under George Walls in the Robert of Stirling, and George can read music, and he can create scores, but he can't write scores. So it's a sort of running joke that it is the blind guy in the band that actually writes out the drum scores. So that's how I sort of learned to read and write. But very much my experience of reading and writing music developed after my playing had developed. So I was coming as a player to read music rather than reading music to becoming a player. So reading and writing didn't really influence my learning, but it certainly made me into a better player. And I do wish that when I started, there was more effort put into teaching me how to read and write, because I think at that time it was a bit of, well, he's blind, so it's going to be easier for him to learn by ear. Yes, that is the case. But I think for a long time, I was playing soundy likeys. So what I was playing sounded correct, but it might not have been what the rest of the corps were playing. And I think that made my transition into competition pipe bands a lot harder, because I wasn't able to see what people were playing. I was just hearing it. And yes, what I was playing sounded exactly like what others were playing, but it wasn't the same. And that is very important, the higher grades you get with drum corps. So I think if I could have learned to read and write earlier, it would have been more beneficial. But I don't think it's had any major hindrance on me developing as a player.
Yeah. And Austin, what about accessing pipe music scores? How do you go about doing that?
So I learn exclusively by ear. I cannot read sheet music, and from what a lot of Braille resources for sheet music out there. And I mean, to be fair about that, it would be kind of difficult to do any kind of reading on the fly, because what you'd have to do is you'd have to take your hands off the fingers on the page and be able to read the music and then go back to the chanter.
Yeah.
So I rely heavily upon quality, recordings to be able to learn music, and hindered me, I think. In the case of speedy learning, for me at least, it's very hard to learn things extremely quickly. It takes time for me to really solidify all the grace notes and doublings, and especially with Pibroch, Cronlewis, and all the themal notes and everything else are in the correct spots, and to make sure that there are no mistakes. It takes a lot of analyzation in order to make sure that everything is correct, ingrained within the memory. So eventually it becomes an autopilot, but still, learning things to go and play them at a high level, it does take some time when you learn them by ear. I can hear something and kind of know the melody within a few reiterations of it. It's just kind of retaining it that is more so the difficult part. So I can hear a rail hornpipe and know that it goes a certain way, but to get it correctly, if I were to actually be playing it in a band, I'd have to study a recording for a little while to make sure that I was playing it exactly the same as the recording and bass notes are, which is that's a weakness of mine.
So Austin, let's say you're about to go on preparing for a Pibroch competition, and you have a little memory lapse, and you're wondering, is where that phrase goes. How would you go about? Most people or sighted people would just go straight to the score and take a look at it and get a refresh of the memory. How would you go about that?
Well, with me, a lot of my work is done before the contest. If I'm making mistakes on the day, that means I haven't done my homework.
Okay.
Um, and typically, what I will do if I really need to make sure that I know everything is when I'm traveling to the contest, I'll listen to all just to and just go through them like anybody would review the sheet music. Like for example, if you're sitting on an airplane and you just have nothing else to do and you're just looking at the sheet music and singing the tunes in your head, um, that's kind of what I typically do.
Mhm.
Feel secure when I'm leaving for the contest.
Okay.
But on the day, I try not to even think about it on the day because if I'm going to make a mistake, well, it's going to happen anyway. About to go compete, I'm getting the pipe right, almost to my own detriment.
All right.
I think I'm infamous for taking too long to tune, and I know that. But yeah, on the day, I really don't even focus on that. If anything, I'll focus on okay, make sure that phrase is expressed correctly, and then all right, it's time to go. Let's
Yeah.
move.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. They're really interesting approaches. So what about any stories or anecdotes about situations that you've encountered along the way in your piping and drumming careers? Maybe Robbie, any things come to mind that are uh, maybe unusual for a blind person such as yourself?
Um, if you go onto Google and sorry, if you go onto YouTube and type in Robbie Crow World Solo Drumming, the first video that comes up is from around 2013, and I'm walking into the room and I get ready to start playing, and then we have to stop because my piper tells me that the judges are actually behind me. So I've walked in, I've not seen where the judges are, and I've started to get ready to play, and just I've had to be turned around so I can actually face the judges. I think that's probably one of the best examples of something that's happened. And to this day, I think it was Jim Baxter and possibly Gordon Craig. I can't remember, but I know it was definitely Jim Baxter. And to this day, Jim still jokes that it's still one of the funniest things that he's seen happen. But yeah, no, I think that's probably the only thing that's really happened because of my visual impairment. There's been a few trips and falls coming off the field after we finished playing due to bad weather, but I can also think of sighted people who have done that marching off in the muddy weather. So I think that's probably the only visual impairment specific one that I can think of.
Yeah. Austin, what about you? Any things that come to mind?
Well, there are a lot of them. Seeing as how I think I'll have to emphasize again, everybody's case is different. So being that I don't have any, need a bit more assistance. What we were able to work out was a bit of a system that allows for no errors, especially in the pipe band. Solos, it really doesn't matter. I don't typically march, and can just manage going up to the judge. There have been a couple of occasions though where I've stopped, like I've ended, and I've faced completely away from the judge, and I had no clue because I was in such a zone, and I realized that the judge was behind me. I'm like, and see the guy off. But typically in pipe bands, there are two things that I would need. One of them is a guide, so to guide me into the circle. When you're in a group of people, you don't want to be marching out of step slightly or over stride and run into somebody in the back in the middle of a competition. So I have somebody who typically guides me into the circle. And then as I got higher up into the grades in pipe bands, it became very evident that not having the information that everybody else was having was becoming a bit detrimental. So a lot of us, the guys in the Camerons, Richard King and myself, and a few others, tried to think of different anecdotes. And the most effective one was just to have somebody tap on my left foot. The person that was next to me tap on my left foot at the same time. The pipe major was tapping their foot and in the exact rhythm or the exact same way, just so I can have the information relayed to me so that when transitions, for example, from a march to a strathspey, or a transition in a bit more difficult to manage at times because of the innovations in medley construction. Um, that helps a tremendous amount to have me be absolutely dead on, right on. As everybody knows, that one person that's ahead or behind can certainly distract the several guys around them if they're consistently so, and it takes away from the performance. And so we wanted to try and achieve the best result. So that was one of them, and we've tried a number of other things. For example, we tried using a guitar string, because I used to chip reeds a ton and still do to this day, and it's dollars in reeds. But I used to chip reeds much more than I do now, and so we tried to think of several anecdotes. And I think it was one of these people that was on the Dunsar forums who said, "Oh, we can just try and put a guitar string around the reed on the tenon of the channel. You could hemp it into the chanter." And we eventually tried it and abandoned it because it leaked air tremendously, and we couldn't get a tight enough seal to where it was gonna actually be effective. But that could have been solved by putting like a notch in the top of the chanter in the tenon, but we just didn't really take it that far. So I mean, it was a lot of trial and error to find, and ultimately it wasn't really a lot of thinking. It was more so, okay, this is the problem, here is a possible solution, and we can try it out and see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll try something else.
Yeah.
And that's how it so it was a very collaborative effort between all of us, and thankfully everybody was very, very supportive. I really I'm happy that I was able to develop under a big group of people that were behind me and all that.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting to think about some of the small things, small but important things, like capping a chanter, or putting it back into a stock,
Yep.
and the challenges that a person like you might face.
Sure.
But just wanted to talk to both of you about, have you ever felt like you've had preferential treatment as a sightless piper and drummer, that was undue? I'm just trying to get a feel for sort of how you feel you operate within the community, the piping and drumming community.
No,
Robbie, maybe.
no, I think for me, I think any of the treatment I've always had from people within the community has always been nothing but helpful. So when I was lead drummer at Denny and Dunipace, I was lead drummer of the grade 4 band, and the pipe major and I had to find a way for me to see his foot, a lot like Austin has to. I'd find a way to see Paul's foot for the changes from March to Spain to Rio. And we just, Paul just had to get really good at doing big steps so that I could see them. And even to this day, the drummers in the band, if we are marching into the circle, they always make sure to, if I'm too far forward and the guy next to me will nudge me and I walk back a bit, and vice versa. If I'm not far enough forward, George will stare at me and that's me forward. So I don't think I've ever had preferential treatment from any judges or from any band members. And in many respects, it's probably quite good to be visually impaired in some ways, because, especially for me, because George has got a death stare, and we always joke that I'm the only person that can't see it when he's looking at me. So yeah, it has been, I don't think that my visual impairment has given me preferential treatment or has given me any undue discrimination directly from the judges. I think there's a couple of little things that pipe band organisations as a whole can improve on, but we'll come back to that in a minute. I'm keen to hear what Austin has to say.
Yeah, Austin, what are your thoughts about preferential treatment?
So no, I don't think I really had much of an issue with preferential treatment, and I would be against the idea that a result causes a visual impairment. I think the playing field, as far as playing music is concerned, is very level, because I mean, in terms of competing, contest first and foremost. And I would think when, when it's on and when you're having a good tune, really nothing else matters but the music. Music is really a universal language. So if I were to be then somebody else who doesn't happen to have sight loss, and if they played a better tune and I were to get some kind of a better result, I wouldn't be happy with that. But thankfully, it hasn't happened at all. Most of the community, as in Robbie's case, has been extremely helpful and forward thinking about this.
Okay. Sounds good. So we talked about associations and maybe what the piping and drumming world might do better when it comes to people with visual or hearing or whatever impairments. Robbie, you seem to have a few thoughts about associations, maybe.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, and it comes back to what Austin was saying earlier about being communicated with in the same way. No matter if it's been solos or when I was lead drummer, every crit sheet I've ever had has been completely inaccessible to me. Regardless of whether or not the judge's handwriting is actually legible to a sighted person in the first place, the fact is that the way that crit sheets are given out in every single organisation in the world now, where they're handwritten, to me, it's just antiquated, and there's no need for it in this day and age. There is enough software out there to have judges with iPads that they can write on, and then that iPad can then translate handwriting into text. The technology is out there, and for us to still be using pen and paper, which isn't just inaccessible to Austin and I, it's inaccessible to anyone who might be using glasses. Or, if it's raining, then you're going to get worse sheets than somebody else, physical worse sheets, because the water's got to them. So I don't understand why we're still using inaccessible handwritten sheets in this day and age. And I think, for me, that then goes on to things like the RSPBA website and the PBBSO website, and all websites out there. When the results are posted up, the websites are hard to access in the first place because they've not been created with screen readers in mind. But then you go onto tables, which are extremely hard to navigate for visually impaired people. So I'd say that the whole structure outside of actually marching into the circle is probably the most inaccessible bit for me. The actual playing and marching into the circle, that's probably the easy bit if you're a pipe band member or if you're a solo player. Actually, the hard bit is getting that feedback back in a way that's best for you. Because at the moment, myself, I'm guessing Austin, we've got to get someone to read that information to us. And that's not the best way to be doing things in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
Austin, I don't know if you agree with that or...
Oh, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. But not only that, sometimes, and this is no kind of criticism of judges in general. It's just something that tends to happen. But the handwriting of the judges is sometimes very illegible, I think. And then when you have somebody reading out your crit sheets, your critique sheets, it's even hard for them to be able to read it out. And so you really don't get much feedback unless you speak with the judge. And typically, that's what I will do. I'll ask later on, hey, tell me what you think I could have done differently. Tell me what you wrote down. But Robbie does bring up a good point. I actually hadn't thought of it much before. The technology is certainly there. It's certainly possible to be able to have an electronic system in place, not just for us, but for everybody. Technology is such a big thing in the 21st century now that there's no reason why we couldn't incorporate it into the piping community. Other than that, really, from what I've been able to understand within my own playing and my own involvement within the community, is really just communication, keeping that line of communication open at all times, and trying to negotiate with the person's needs is extremely important. I think that's actually pretty good. Although, and with certain in certain people will have different exposure to it than others, and that's with anywhere and in the public. But communication is my biggest thing. Just keeping that line of communication open is really the best way that we can move forward.
Great. Yeah, really good points, guys. Really appreciate you taking the time away from your busy practice schedules to share some thoughts. Anything before we sign off here?
I think what I would say is what can be most helpful to any disabled person, whether they're visually impaired, they're a wheelchair user, whether they're a crutch user, whether a hearing impairment. The most helpful thing to have around anybody with any impairment is to have that group of people who are willing to support them and who are willing to help them in any situation. And I've got to say, growing up in pipe bands and being still in pipe bands, sometimes pipe band people are the most fickle bunch that you will ever come across. But then sometimes actually they are the most helpful people that you come across, because you're all in it for the same reason and you're all there to enjoy the music at the end of the day. And actually I've found that the biggest help to me when I have been struggling with my visual impairment, and this is on the field and off the field, sometimes you have those rubbish days, and actually the pipe band people are usually the first ones to come around you and to offer you the support that you need, both on the field and off the field. So as any disabled person will tell you, first and foremost, it doesn't matter if you've got the right technology, it doesn't matter if you've got the right paid support around you. The most important thing to any person is to have that group of people around you who understand you as a person. And I've got to say, the pipe band world has been absolutely fantastic with me for that. And I think that, sometimes, yes, there's politics, sometimes there's arguments, and sometimes there's things that you just think are silly. But I've always found that at the end of the day, pipe band people will try and help you as much as they can. And for a disabled person, that is just invaluable.
That's good to hear. That's very nice. Austin, any concluding thoughts?
Wholeheartedly agree. The pipe band community and the piping community worldwide are it's just an incredible fraternity. It's done so much for me within my own life that otherwise I can't imagine really living any other way. I don't know if I'd be able to travel as much by this time in my life if I hadn't been involved with pipe bands and met the people that I have, and to know that I have, that you have not only that main support system, but to be able to have friends all over the world who also would be considered your support system is truly, I think, one of the best things about it.
Great stuff. That's terrific. Well, once again, guys, thanks a lot for your time, and I think readers of Pipes Drums will really learn a lot from hearing about your experiences and your thoughts and some advice for the future. So all the best.
Thanks, Andrew.
Sure.